Jason Statham, the man synonymous with toughness, precision, and control. The actor who defined an era of raw, no-nonsense action films. To millions, he's the face of unshakable strength, the street-smart Brit who fought his way from working-class obscurity to global superstardom. But behind the adrenaline, the stunts, and the tough guy persona lies a story that most fans have never heard. A story filled with heartbreak, sacrifice, and the crushing loneliness that fame can't fix. At 58, Jason Statham's life looks like an unstoppable success. He's worked alongside Hollywood's biggest names, from Dwayne Johnson to Sylvester Stallone, and built an empire from pure grit. Yet beneath that rugged image lies a man who's been quietly carrying the weight of regret and emotional pain. The tragedy of Jason Statham isn't found in the explosions or the car chases. It's found in the life he's lived off-screen. He's a man who's lost friends, battled through betrayal, and struggled with the pressures of being Hollywood's most reliable tough guy. For all the fame, fortune, and fast cars, there's a side of Jason that's deeply human. A side scarred by loss, family struggles, and a relentless demand for perfection that's left him questioning who he really is. This is the story the cameras never captured. The heartbreak, the truth, and the man behind the legend. Because no matter how strong Jason Statham appears on screen, his real battles were never fought with his fists, but with his heart, before the fame, the red carpets, and the multi-million-dollar action franchises. Jason Statham was just a boy from Shirebrook, Derbyshire, a quiet town in England that rarely made headlines. Born into a working-class family, Jason's early life was anything but glamorous. His father Barry was a street seller and occasional lounge singer, and his mother Eileen was a dancer. Money was tight, and survival wasn't about luxury, it was about hustle. That word would come to define Jason's entire existence. Hustle. As a teenager, Jason found solace in one thing: movement. He was drawn to the water, to diving, to pushing his body beyond its limits. For over a decade, he trained as a competitive diver, even joining Britain's national diving squad. For 12 long years, he honed his discipline, competing internationally and dreaming of the Olympics. But despite his talent, he never made it to that final stage. Sponsors were scarce, opportunities rarer. When he was eventually dropped from the squad, it shattered him. Everything he had worked for, the long mornings, the aching muscles, the sacrifices, suddenly meant nothing. It was a defining moment of failure, one that would plant the seed of resilience that later shaped his acting career. But in those early days, it felt like the end. He returned home, disillusioned, with little money and no direction. For a while, he followed in his father's footsteps, selling knockoff perfumes and cheap jewelry on the streets of London. He would later describe that time as the school of real life. Every sale, every rejection, every shady deal taught him how to read people, how to survive, and how to stay sharp in a world that didn't care whether he succeeded or failed. Then fate intervened. One day, while hustling on the streets, Jason was noticed by a modeling scout. It wasn't glamour that drew them to him. It was his raw, rugged presence. He wasn't the pretty boy type the fashion world usually sought. He was authentic, tough, wiry, unpredictable. Soon he was modeling for brands like French Connection, but even then he remained restless. He didn't belong in front of a still camera. He needed motion, adrenaline, purpose. That's when destiny, and a bit of luck, stepped in again. Director Guy Ritchie, who was casting for his gritty crime film Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, met Jason through mutual contacts. Ritchie was captivated by Jason's authenticity, his accent, his edge. He didn't just look like a street hustler, he was one. Ritchie cast him on the spot, and just like that, Jason Statham went from selling fake watches to starring in one of Britain's most influential cult films. The success of Lock, Stock launched his career, but it also exposed him to the darker side of fame. Overnight, the man who once lived hand-to-mouth was thrust into the world of wealth, recognition, and temptation. Everyone wanted something from him: money, fame, favors. Jason's instincts from the street helped him navigate the chaos, but deep down, he remained guarded. The boy who had once been overlooked was now being celebrated, yet he couldn't fully trust it. As his fame grew with Snatch and later The Transporter, so did his loneliness. The fame that once felt like validation now became a prison. "I never wanted to be famous," he once said in an interview. "I just wanted to work hard and prove I could do something more." But proving himself came at a cost. Sleepless nights, exhaustion, and the growing fear that one misstep could take it all away. What the world saw was a man who never missed a beat. What they didn't see was the boy still fighting the ghosts of failure, still terrified of falling back into obscurity. For Jason Statham, success wasn't just a dream fulfilled, it was a test of survival. And as we'll see, even the toughest men can't outrun their past forever. Jason Statham built his reputation on being unbreakable. The man who never backs down, who stares danger in the face without flinching. But beneath that armor of calm precision and physical strength lies a man who has wrestled with emotions just as dangerous as the villains he defeats on screen. Behind the confident smirk and iron will is a lifetime spent fighting battles the public never saw, especially when it came to love, family, and the price of perfection. As Jason's fame exploded in the early 2000s, so did the demands on his time and energy. The Transporter made him an international star. Overnight, he went from indie cult hero to Hollywood's next big action icon. The studios saw him as a machine, reliable, bankable, and fearless. He performed most of his own stunts, took the hits, and risked injury for authenticity. But that dedication came at a cost. In his pursuit of success, personal relationships fell apart quietly behind the scenes. Jason dated several high-profile women, including Kelly Brook and Sophie Monk, but his demanding schedule and intense focus on career often pushed love aside. Friends described him as loyal but emotionally closed, a man who cared deeply yet found it almost impossible to open up. Decades of discipline and independence had taught him to rely on no one. Vulnerability felt dangerous. In interviews, he'd laugh off questions about his love life, saying things like, "I'm married to my work." But those who knew him privately sensed the truth. Beneath the humor was a deep loneliness. Then came Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, the supermodel and actress who would become the love of his life. They met in 2010, and for the first time, Jason seemed genuinely at peace. She wasn't intimidated by his fame or his gruff exterior. She saw the man behind the tough image, the quiet, thoughtful Jason, who valued loyalty above all. Their connection was instant, but as their love story blossomed, Jason's inner fears began to surface once more. Hollywood was relentless. He was approaching his 50s, an age when most action stars slow down. Studios began hinting at younger replacements, and the pressure to stay relevant pushed him harder than ever. Every new role had to be bigger, faster, more dangerous. While his body endured the physical toll, his mind carried the emotional one. The constant need to prove himself, even after decades of success, wore him down. Rosie once described him as the calm in the storm. But privately, Jason struggled to balance his obsession with control and the unpredictability of real life. He feared losing the very thing he had built, his image, his strength, his edge. And yet, ironically, it was his willingness to appear invincible that made him most fragile. He rarely spoke about his insecurities, but they revealed themselves in his actions: the long hours at the gym, the sleepless nights before a major stunt, the way he'd silently distance himself when he felt overwhelmed. When the couple welcomed their first child in 2017, Jason's world shifted completely. For the first time, he had something that truly mattered more than fame. Fatherhood softened him, but it also forced him to confront his own fears of failure, of mortality, of becoming the kind of man his child wouldn't admire. He had spent his entire life running from his past, but holding his son for the first time made him realize he could no longer live defined by it. Yet even happiness didn't come without pain. The burden of fame and the constant physical risk of his work haunted Rosie. She once admitted in an interview that every time Jason performed a dangerous stunt, she prayed he'd come home safely. Behind the scenes, the couple faced near tragedies, on-set accidents that reminded them both how fragile life truly was. Jason Statham, the man who'd built his career on fearlessness, finally understood the one thing that terrified him most: losing the people he loved. And as his career reached new heights, that fear would only deepen, because the higher he climbed, the farther he had to fall. Jason Statham has made a career out of doing the impossible, leaping off speeding cars, diving into the ocean, and walking away from explosions as if they were nothing. But in 2013, while filming The Expendables 3, the line between action and reality vanished. What was supposed to be another thrilling stunt nearly ended in tragedy, and it left a mark on him that would never fade. The scene was simple enough on paper. Jason, behind the wheel of a 3-ton truck, would drive toward the edge of a dock and brake just in time. The kind of shot he had done dozens of times before. But something went horribly wrong. The brakes failed. In an instant, the truck crashed through the safety barrier and plunged into the icy waters below. For a few seconds, everyone on set froze. Crew members screamed as they watched the vehicle sink. By the time rescuers reached the edge of the dock, Jason was nowhere to be seen. Minutes felt like hours. Then, miraculously, he emerged, soaked, gasping for air, but alive. He had escaped through the window underwater, relying purely on instinct and years of diving experience. Later, his co-star Sylvester Stallone would describe the moment in an interview. "We all thought we'd lost him." Jason is a true athlete, but no one walks away from something like that. He cheated death that day. The incident became one of the defining moments of Jason's life. Outwardly, he brushed it off with his usual calmness, saying he just got lucky. But privately, those who knew him said he changed after that day. The man who had built his entire career on physical control and precision had suddenly been reminded how fragile life really is. He started turning down some of the riskier stunts, not out of fear but perspective. He realized he wasn't invincible, and that if something had gone differently, he might have left behind the people who mattered most. Rosie later admitted that after the accident, Jason became quieter, more introspective. He started spending more time at home, away from the constant chaos of film sets. But Hollywood doesn't slow down. The industry kept demanding more, and Jason, ever the perfectionist, couldn't completely step away. He returned to work, starring in Furious 7 and The Meg, where danger once again became part of his daily life. Yet even on camera, fans began noticing something different. Behind the trademark smirk and razor-sharp focus was a subtle weariness, a man who had seen too much, endured too much, but refused to show weakness. In interviews, he'd occasionally let the mask slip. When asked about the near-death experience, he'd pause before answering. "It gives you perspective," he said once. "You start realizing what actually matters." That brush with death forced Jason to reevaluate everything: his career, his purpose, and even his identity. For decades, he had been defined by toughness. But toughness alone couldn't protect him from fate, from aging, from time. The pain in his joints lingered longer. Recovery took weeks instead of days. And as he crossed into his late 50s, he began to face the reality that his body couldn't take the same punishment forever. He also grew more reflective about his upbringing, the working class. Kid from Shirebrook who sold fake jewelry on London. Streets before fame found him. He had fought his way to the top, relying on grit and discipline, but at a cost few ever see. Every scar, every injury, every sleepless night was part of a price he paid to stay relevant. Rosie became his anchor through it all. Whenever the industry noise grew too loud, she reminded him of the simple things: home-cooked meals, their son's laughter, quiet evenings away from flashing cameras. Jason once told a close friend, "That's where the real life is. Everything else is just noise." Still, the shadows never fully left him. The fear that one wrong move could take it all away lingered in the back of his mind. He had survived that crash by inches, but in many ways, it awakened a truth he could no longer ignore. Life isn't a stunt you can rehearse. And as the years passed, that truth would come to define the final act of Jason Statham's remarkable and heartbreaking journey. As Jason Statham approaches 60, the world still sees him as the face of unbreakable masculinity. The man who can take a hit, deliver one back, and walk away without a scratch. But for Jason himself, The years have rewritten what strength really means. It's no longer about the fights on screen or the muscles in the mirror. It's about endurance, surviving the weight of fame, loss, and time itself. Those close to him say he's changed. The man who once thrived on chaos now prefers quiet mornings, long walks, and time with his family. His son, Jack, became his greatest motivation to slow down, to be present. Jason has admitted that fatherhood forced him to look inward, to face the parts of himself he'd buried for years. "You can't be the tough guy all the time," he once said softly in an interview. "Sometimes you've got to be human." The pressures of Hollywood, though, never really let go. The action genre that made him a household name demands a constant display of physical perfection, a challenge that becomes harder with every passing year. Behind closed doors, Jason's friends have noticed the toll, the old injuries that ache, the fatigue that lingers, the frustration of a man who built his career on being indestructible, yet now feels the limits of his own body. But what truly breaks the heart is Jason's quiet acceptance of it all. He doesn't chase the spotlight the way he once did. Instead, he's focused on producing, mentoring younger actors, and spending time with Rosie and their child. There's humility in how he speaks now, a calm acceptance of his journey, and perhaps even the regrets that come with it. He's opened up about missing moments, birthdays, family gatherings, nights when he should have been home instead of on set halfway across the world. "You tell yourself you're doing it for them," he once reflected. "But sometimes you realize you just got lost in it all." Even as his career slows, the industry hasn't forgotten him. Younger actors still look up to Jason as the standard, the man who proved you didn't need a famous name or elite training to make it big. He paved his own path through sheer determination and authenticity. Directors describe him as one of the last real action stars, someone who doesn't pretend to be tough, but is tough through and through. Yet, the real tragedy of Jason Statham isn't about fading fame or aging muscles. It's about the cost of chasing greatness. Behind his stoic expression lies a lifetime of sacrifice, pain, and endurance. The man who made millions cheer in theaters often carried a loneliness that applause could never cure. Today, Jason's story serves as a quiet reminder that even heroes have limits. His journey from a struggling street hustler in London to one of Hollywood's most bankable stars is extraordinary. But his story doesn't end with explosions or fight scenes. It ends with reflection, peace, and the understanding that true strength isn't measured by how hard you hit, but by how much you can endure and still keep moving forward. In the twilight of his career, Jason has found a kind of redemption. Not in fame, not in money, but in love, in the small, everyday moments he once overlooked. The laughter of his son, the steady support of Rosie, and the quiet pride of knowing he built a legacy that will outlast him. Jason Statham's tragedy isn't just that time is catching up to him. It's that he gave so much of himself to the world that there's little left unseen. But perhaps that's what makes him who he is. A fighter, a survivor, a man who's lived on the edge, fallen, risen again, and now walks with the wisdom of someone who's learned what truly matters. Because at 58, Jason Statham has finally understood what his entire career tried to teach him. That the toughest battles are never fought on screen. They're fought within the heart,